Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm going to talk to you today about an evil Florida State Trooper named Timothy Scott Harris. Timothy Scott Harris is still incarcerated in the state of Florida for the rape and murder of a lady named Loraine Hendricks. And this happened on March 4th, 1990. Timothy Scott Harris was with the Florida Highway Patrol, patrolling I-95 in Indian River County, Florida. Well, Loraine Hendricks was going to go visit a friend of hers in Broward County. Well, he pulled Loraine Hendricks over for wearing headphones. And to get out of the ticket, he said she could come have sex with him. So it wasn't consensual sex, but he roughed her up pretty bad during sex, and he unintentionally strangled her with her panties. And then he covered her body in pine needles. Now, he was sentenced for rape and murder because he covered up the body and didn't report it to the authorities. He also, and then, like I said, covered it up in pine needles and then went back to work like it was nothing. And he said he was separated from his wife and his two children, and his wife was Sandra Lynn Wessendorf, and then her married name was Sandra Lynn Harris, obviously. She was, and everybody called her Sandy, and she had filed for a restraining order against Timothy Scott Harris because of harassment and then also occasional physical abuse and also infidelity. Timothy Scott Harris typically had a mistress as well. So he said he was being traumatized by being separated from his wife, and that's why he had such rough sex with Loraine Hendricks. And Loraine Hendricks worked for the Highway Patrol briefly as a civilian. She was a model for the Highway Patrol's Arrive Alive campaign, which promoted safe driving within the state of Florida. Now, a little bit of background information on Timothy Scott Harris. He always wanted to be a cop. And most cops are good, but there's always a mild percentage of bad cops. And as you would see with Timothy Scott Harris. And Ann Rule, true crime writer Ann Rule, wrote an excellent book called You Belong to Me, which covers the Timothy Scott Harris situation very well. I recommend that you guys read that book. That offers a ton of insight in this situation, or of that story, I should say. Well, Timothy Scott Harris was a track and cross-country star in high school. He ran a lot, and after high school, he immediately wanted to study to be a police officer. He enlisted in the Army Reserve, wanted to be military police to train to be a regular police officer. And he did that for a little while, and then he took some courses, police science courses at the community college to help him be a police officer. And his first police job was Melbourne Village, and it was only a 3-man department, a very small town in Florida, and the department ceased to exist shortly after. Basically, it was formed and was just incorporated into a county or another city. But that job, he at one point, though, was Melbourne Village Police Officer of the Year, but it was a 3-man department, so typically the award just changed hands every year. But he was driving his patrol car too fast, like a bat out of hell, number one. And then he was chasing women on the job, like pulling them over when they weren't committing a traffic infraction and taking their license and then making them come to the station to pick up their license. So instead of firing him, though, they asked him to resign, but he got a glowing letter of recommendation from the Melbourne Village Police Department. But again, the police department ceased to exist shortly thereafter. He left, so all the records were basically tore up. So he went to the Sebastian Police Department, and that is where he met Sandy, Sandra Lynn Wessendorf. Everybody called her Sandy. Same way, he was 21 and she was 16, and that was back in the early 80s when the laws were a lot different than they are now. But Sandy was attracted to the uniform and also that Tim was interested in her. And Tim eventually met Sandy's parents. Now, Fred Wessendorf, who was Sandy's father, was a journalist for the local newspaper. He took an immediate liking to Tim, but Sandy's mother and Fred's wife, Pat Wessendorf, said there was just something about Tim that sent chills up her spine. She said one time Tim knocked on the door, and then when they went out to open the door, he was hiding in the bushes. He was hiding in the family's garden, and Sandy said it was because he was so shy. But what Pat Wessendorf thought was nobody could be that bashful and be a policeman. And also, when Tim was dating Sandy, he had another girlfriend named Michelle Schrader, who was at Auburn University. And not only was he dating Michelle Schrader, he was engaged to her. But eventually, him and Michelle split up, and he married Sandy. And what you won't notice in one of their wedding pictures, his hand's behind Sandy's back, but he's pinching her. Tim basically treated Sandy like shit. The reason he got so upset that she left him was because Tim always typically did the breaking up in his relationship. He couldn't stand if somebody else left him when he didn't want to be left, even though he treated her like dirt. He had affairs the whole time he was married to Sandy. Now, while Tim did not drink, smoke, or do drugs, he was in a hurry to have things. He would always, just like a little child, try to buy everything he could. The most Sandy would let him do to take out a loan for was to get a fishing boat. Tim eventually wanted a helicopter, but Sandy worked at a bank for a little while and then at Publix Bakery, and Tim was a police officer. There's no way they could have afforded a helicopter, and she had to put her foot down there. But then many other times she consented, but because she managed the finances, he had an excellent credit history, and so he applied to the Florida Highway Patrol. And when he applied to the Florida Highway Patrol, he did pretty good at the academy. He scored a 99 out of 100 in his defensive driving courses. Where he struggled a little bit was the firearms course. He scored 88 out of 100, but that was his lowest score total at the academy. At the Highway Patrol, the Florida State Trooper Academy. Typically, troopers have to move and relocate, but Tim knew some people higher up in the Highway Patrol, so they didn't have to relocate. And Tim was able, and Sandy were able to get to stay where they were for Tim's assignments. And Tim was dedicated to the job. He prepared his court cases days in advance and wrote plenty of tickets. But he was a hard worker, but he was also bad with finances, and he treated his wife Sandy like dirt. If they had a girl, it was going to be named Jennifer Lynn because that's what Tim wanted. If they had a boy, it was going to be Timothy Jr. And him and Sandy had an argument when she was going into labor, and he wouldn't take Sandy to the front door of the hospital. He just parked in a regular hospital parking space and made Sandy walk to the ER while she was in labor with their child. Take note of that. That's how sick of a person Timothy Scott Harris was. He was also a loner. He never really had any friends. Occasionally, he would hang out with Sandy's sister's husband, who was also a police officer, not a highway patrolman, but a police officer. And they would go play cards about once a week, him and Sandy, and then Sandy's sister and her husband. But Sandy's sister's husband didn't particularly care for Tim. One time, him and Tim were riding around, and Tim was very racist, and he hated African Americans, and he rolled the window down and yelled, "Hey, N-word." And the Sandy's brother-in-law was sick and wanted to drop Tim off right there. He was just sick and disgusted with it. Also, Sandy's brother-in-law cared when he had to deal with death or destruction or racism, and just would come home sometimes in bad moods or sometimes just very distraught with all some of the